discomfort is going to be a feature of your life no matter what. Choosing discomfort up front can look like having that conversation you know you need to have, working on your CV to prepare yourself to leave that job that you hate, not eating the cupcake, taking a minute when you're angry with your partner, or listening to the 2-hour philosophy podcast instead of spending 2 hours on TikTok.
You have found the Thinking Mind podcast.
Welcome back to the Thinking Mind podcast. My name's Alex. I'm a consultant psychiatrist. Today we're going to be discussing the problem with success in a modern world, or why delaying gratification is the modern superpower. In last week's episode, we discussed fear and laziness, and this concept of evolutionary mismatch, how our brains weren't necessarily designed for a modern world. Today we'll use the same concept to look at the difference between success in our ancestral environment versus our modern environment, and how these differences can elucidate what makes success in a modern world difficult. By understanding these dynamics, my hope is that you'll be able to face whatever challenges you're facing with a bit more clarity, and it can provide you with an easier path forward. So, thinking more on the topic of success, in an ancestral hunter-gatherer environment, a human being tended to interact with their environment in a much more immediate and direct way. Needs were identified and met over a relatively short time span. The rewards that people sought tended to be concrete, like a good place for shelter, a piece of meat, or information about a tree with ripe fruit. At this time in human history, delayed gratification was probably more of a disadvantage than an advantage, and people who were inclined to delay gratification were probably less likely to survive than those who did. Signals from your environment were a lot more reliable because they were not artificial man-made signals. They could be positive signals that you were encountering something good for you, like food or warmth or sex, or negative signals that you were encountering something bad for you or threatening, like a predator or dangerous terrain or bad weather, or a human being from a different tribe. Therefore, a human being could expect to react to signals that they received from their environment in a much more spontaneous and naturalistic way, like other animals do, and that would actually work. But as we know, the human story didn't stop there. Our brains continued to develop, and with that so did our level of consciousness. But what exactly did we become conscious of? Among other things, we became conscious of a past and a future. And once that happened, naturally it follows that we discovered the concept of work. Or you could say we discovered work. But what is work? Work is a form of activity where we exert effort in an organized manner, not for an immediate reward, but for a reward which is delayed into the future, and a reward which is often greater than what you would expect for that amount of effort. Strangely enough, this is covered in the Adam and Eve story in the Bible, when after eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge, which is a metaphor for humans attaining a higher level of consciousness, God talks to Adam, and I never thought I'd be quoting the Bible on a psychology podcast, but regardless, God tells Adam, "Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return." So here he's telling Adam food will result from painful work. And he's also telling Adam, of course, that he's now going to be conscious of his mortality. But we're going to leave mortality for another episode. Fast forwarding through human history, after we become more conscious, we develop agriculture, civilization, industry, and now we find ourselves in 2023, in the information age where everything is completely different. Conventional success in 2023 relies on a completely different paradigm, or set of paradigms. So what are the skills that put you ahead of the curve in 2023? Here's a few examples. The ability to delay gratification, emotional intelligence, the ability to interact in a large social landscape, the ability to regulate your emotions, the ability to regulate your thinking and your behavior. To illustrate just how much things have changed, it's worth realizing that now you need all those skills just to achieve something simple like staying healthy. Just staying healthy in a modern Western environment requires you to exert an enormous amount of effort because there's such an abundant amount of things in the environment which are being pushed towards you that are bad for you. So you need all of those skills to not eat food that's bad for you, to not drink too much alcohol or use drugs, to not become addicted to technologies like video games, YouTube, social media, to get good sleep, to carve out the necessary time to exercise. There's a whole world which is trying to tempt you and seduce you at all times, and you need those skills just to form a reasonable boundary between yourself and the world. With career success, for most people, what this requires is for a person to accrue skills and knowledge over a long period of time, and eventually to start trading those skills and knowledge for money. Money itself is, of course, an abstraction. It's an abstract form of value which we invented so that we could trade with each other more easily across larger populations. And the strange thing about money is that money only has value if everyone agrees it has value. What it comes down to is what I like to refer to as an economy of comfort, where in general, things that are good for you will give you a small amount of discomfort up front with a delayed reward later. In general, things that are bad for you will give you an easy reward immediately, followed by a delayed pain or discomfort. Eating too much junk food is really easy and fun to do in the moment, but in about an hour it'll make you feel bad. Working on your business on the weekend is generally not that fun in the moment, but if things go well, it leads to a payoff and greater security in the long term. This is why the concept of the deal with the devil or the Faustian bargain is so prominent in our culture and our literature. It illustrates the fact that a quick and easy reward now often leads to a disproportionate cost in the future. And this is a problem that could only plague an organism with a clear conception of a past and a future like a human being. It's also worth mentioning that these human vulnerabilities are actively taken advantage of by, for example, food companies who design food to be what's called hyper-palatable, which is essentially another word for addictive, or social media companies which facilitate the creation of content which is hyper-entertaining with no real substance. So now that we've discussed all these intricate differences between success in the past and success now, what should you do with this information? Firstly, it's important not to beat yourself up or excessively criticize yourself because you find these things difficult. Most people find these things difficult for all the reasons we're outlining today. The very features of our psychology which make success hard to attain today is what allowed us to survive in the past. As a species, we're very much victims of our success in many ways. Just like we discussed in last week's episode, because we're so fearful, we made the world an extremely safe place, which makes us more fearful. Because we can be lazy, we made the world very convenient, which predisposes us to further laziness. I want you to start to make distinctions between rewards which are artificial and rewards which map onto something achieved in reality. Cocaine is an amazing example of this. Cocaine is an artificial reward because it artificially causes an increase of dopamine in the reward centers of the brain. Ecstasy is another artificial reward which causes a massive release of serotonin in the brain, and both of course come with their come downs afterwards. Exercise is not an artificial reward because you're actually achieving something. The neurochemicals and the endorphins which are released as a result of exercising are a marker that you've done something good for yourself physiologically, that you've improved your physical state in some way. Using this heuristic, you can now ask yourself, if you find yourself in a dilemma between different possible options, where is the real reward? Where is the reward which maps onto something actually achieved in reality? Or am I being deceived into choosing something which is really good up front, but then takes from me on the back end? As always, when trying to change your behavior or embrace discomfort or do something difficult, do it in small, manageable pieces over a long period of time, and you'll achieve way more than if you try and do a huge amount over a few days and then stop because it's too hard. Now, these concepts can apply to almost any area of your life. Using this model, you can look at an area of your life you're not happy with and ask, where am I choosing comfort up front and getting an overall bad deal? Where am I failing to take on discomfort that I need to take on in the short term? Where am I being led by my emotions? Where am I being led by overthinking? The baseline truth at the heart of this episode is that discomfort is going to be a feature of your life no matter what. But what most people don't realize is nowadays many of us have the option of choosing which discomforts we get to take on. Choosing discomfort up front can look like having that conversation you know you need to have, working on your CV to prepare yourself to leave that job that you hate, not eating the cupcake, taking a minute when you're angry with your partner and calmly telling them why you're upset rather than just unloading on them, or listening to the 2-hour philosophy podcast instead of spending 2 hours on TikTok. Just like we discussed last week, because we're playing a long game, it's essential to take joy and satisfaction in the process and gain satisfaction from the fact that even though you might not get everything you want every day, you can, in fact, make progress towards getting what you want every single day. What are some caveats and counter-arguments to what we discussed? Although today we talked about what makes modern success difficult, there are a lot of things that make it a lot easier. And if you're intelligent about how you go about it, it can be a lot more rewarding. Technology now allows us to connect with and trade with people on a much vaster scale. Technology also allows for reward not only to be delayed, but compounded. This means you get a greater sized reward for what otherwise you would expect for that level of effort. If you think of something that's now commonplace, like a podcast, you could talk to people one-on-one, you could talk to people in small groups like 5 or 10, you could teach a class with 30 people, and that's probably easier upfront to do. It doesn't require as much effort. But if you're willing to do a bit of work upfront to buy the right microphones, get the right software, choose a service online that can host your episodes, market it online, learn how to edit your audio, learn how to do post-production. If you learn all those skills, which is a lot more difficult upfront than just talking to people in person, then all of a sudden you can talk to people in their hundreds and thousands. And in the case of really successful podcasts, you can talk to people in their millions. And the last caveat is that even though you should be playing the long game, that does not mean you should not look for ways to speed up your progress. And you can speed up your progress by, for example, getting a team around you, getting a mentor, hiring a professional like a coach or a therapist, putting yourself in a community with people trying to accomplish the same goal as you. And it's important to learn the distinction between an intelligent, strategic shortcut or trying to take the quote easy way out or to avoid hard work. So, a couple of take-home messages from today's episode. Our instincts, which once served us really well in the past, aren't serving us so well now. And rather than responding to our environment much more naturalistically, we have to take a step back and learn a whole bunch of skills, probably the chief of which is to delay gratification if we expect to be successful in a modern world. Choose carefully which discomfort you want to take on, and take on the discomfort in small, manageable pieces consistently. Embrace the paradox that success is a long game and you should enjoy as much of the process as possible, but you should also seek out and implement intelligent, strategic shortcuts when you can. So hopefully this discussion can help you understand a bit more about the dynamics of the time you're living in and how that relates to your psychology. I think a lot of what we've talked about today is something that people understand in an implicit way, but I think it really helps to spell it out in a more explicit way, because this helps provide leverage that can actually change your behavior and do something differently in your life. If you want a detailed step-by-step guide to behavior change, we released one in January 2022, the long-term guide to behavior change. And you can also check out our episode about fear and laziness, which we released last week and also discusses this concept of evolutionary mismatch. This is the Thinking Mind podcast, a podcast all about psychology, psychiatry, mental health, self-development, and much more. To support the podcast, you can share it with a friend, follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen, give us a rating, or if you want to support us further, you can buy us a coffee using the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening this week. If you've got any feedback, as always, do get in touch. If you enjoyed the episode, why not give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, because it really helps other people to find us. If you want to get in touch, you can find us on Instagram or Twitter, or you can drop us an email. And if you value the show more generally, why not buy us a coffee just to help keep us going? Thanks so much.